Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Mindset. And the question why entrepreneurs think differently than non-entrepreneurs. That is what we learned so far. Entrepreneurs have a different mindset, and everyone can learn that mindset. However, the question is why and under which circumstances entrepreneurs think and act differently. And this is about the entrepreneurial approach. Let's look at the oil price and the development of crude oil over the last, decades. Starting in the 70s when we had the first oil crisis. And then within the first oil crisis, the price came from about $4 to the highest, I think, $42. If you look at that, the development before, it was really stable at a very comparably low oil price if you look at that from today. But even if you look at that from today, so if you look at from that perspective onto the first oil crisis, that was nothing what happened in the 70s. It was relatively stable after the 70s. So in the 80s and the 90s, nothing much happened. But beginning of 2000, 2005, the oil went up a lot. Then came the financial crisis, though the price dropped. Then went up again, now dropped again. What's the development of the oil? And a lot more important, what do you do as an entrepreneur? Or let's say, what do you do as a businessman if you have to deal with oil? If you have to work in a company which relies on oil a lot. What do? You work for the chemical industry, for example, and you need oil for your products or your production processes or both. What do you do in that case? Well, everyone would tell you I would try to find out how the oil price could develop in the future. If it goes up, stays stable, or goes up a lot, or even drops a little bit. Nobody knows. And also what else you would do is probably hedge yourself against the risks which might come up there. And this is what large companies do. They try to gather as much data as they can get on what could happen in the future, what's the development in the Middle East, what happens in Saudi Arabia, the biggest oil producing country, and so on. Try to gather this data, try to build scenarios, different scenarios based on the data, and then decide for a specific plan which should be executed in the future. And this is again, and I said that before, what you learn in business school. You define a future goal, and if you have that defined goal, you try to derive a way towards the goal, you gather the resources necessary and to carry out the plan. And ideally, you end up at the defined goal. So that was what we had at this process before. This is the first step, and then derive the way towards the goal. And the third step is you gather the resources necessary, and if then you are able to carry out the plan, you end up at the defined goal. Ideally, you end up there. But look at the oil prices. Unexpected things could happen. And if you look at that, and I'd like to start with a quote from one of the German chemical companies, big chemical companies. The CEO of this company once said, actually said in 2015, so not long ago, we had expected more favorable conditions. Over the course of the year, the business environment deteriorated as political and macroeconomic challenges increased. Oil prices, you see it here, and growth both dropped sharply. Sales and earnings fell in this difficult environment. So he talked about difficult environment, Jürgen Hambrecht, the CEO. Although they did extensive research in a relatively stable market, maybe it was more unstable in that sense. They used their empirical models. They tried to forecast, so they tried to go through that business school process. However, at the very end, it was wrong. And this is what entrepreneurs face a lot more often, because entrepreneurial markets are not stable. And entrepreneurs are not able to build large empirical models because they have to act. And especially in these situations, because there are many markets which are not stable. Think about the Segway. The Segway will be to the car what the car was to the horse and buggy. That was Dean Kamen. He said that, I think, in 2001 when he started his business on Segways. And by the way, he was, for example, financed by Steve Jobs, who believed in the same vision. What about this vision today? Are there so many Segways around? Did this vision become true? Actually not. It's a niche product, Segway. Still running around, and maybe it's still a successful company. However, it was not to the car what was the car to the horse and the buggy. And a satellite telephone, maybe some of you remember, which was considered to be a really important technology, the future of mobile communication. But as one journalist said, the satellites got off the ground, but the business never did. Actually, at this moment, maybe it's going up in the future. And one third example, the French car manufacturer Zimca, which has been a car manufacturer bought by another car manufacturer in the meantime, thought in the 50s that the future will be nuclear-powered cars. And if you follow the discussion on nuclear power nowadays, it is not possible to say that there will ever be a car which is nuclear-powered, because this technology is considered to be a lot too unsafe for cars. Imagine if an accident happens. But even nowadays, in the car industry, we have a new discussion on how do we power cars in the future. And you see, this is also a quite unstable environments. So you see that there are unstable environments. Actually, there are uncertain environments because the uncertainty is increasing over time. And here are some developments which you can see in our globalized world, which increase uncertainty. If you start your own business, start producing something, you never know, due to increasing competition, whether there's a competitor in the US or in China or in Middle East who's doing the same thing, who's actually developing the same product. You just can't know that. But this competitor can easily also try to enter global markets. And financial markets will follow the interesting developments, and they will put pressure on those existing companies who can't follow fast enough. We as customers, we want new products more and more often. So the product life cycles get shorter and shorter, and we as customers are less loyal over time. We buy new things, and we are not stuck with a certain brand, and if a new company comes up with a better product, we probably will change. Which at the very end, if you add all these elements up, you can see that uncertainties are increasing, especially in the last years, not only for entrepreneurs, also for regular business people, but especially for entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs are the ones who try to mitigate these uncertainties. However, how do they do that? And that's the entrepreneurial mindset. We've seen what large companies do. They gather data, they build scenarios, and then they build their plans and execute the plans. So they have a focus on planning and prediction. If you look at entrepreneurs, and Sarah Saraswati was the first one to research on that more extensively, she saw that it's a different approach. It's a focus on skills, knowledge, and resources. Skills like entrepreneurial personality, like what these people have learned before. And a very, very typical quote on that is the one from Michael Dell. And he said, I had to give it a full go and see what happened. So what you can see is that in uncertain situations, people like Michael Dell don't try to predict the future. They don't try to plan. They go step into the future by giving it a full go and then looking what happens, however, remaining in control what they do. And this is the art of being an entrepreneur. And this is very important. You have a focus on yourself, on your skills, on your knowledge, and the resources you might gather. Also the stakeholders you might put together. But then you don't predict the future, but you give it a go and you look what happens, but you try to remain in control, which is very typical for the entrepreneurial mindset. And if you look at Michael Dell and the Dell Corporation, you see that he undertook a very successful development over time. But most important now for us, for you to become an entrepreneur is, first of all, how do you find ideas at the very first time before you start your business? How you evaluate those ideas? And then how you get going in order to go through such a development. And this is what we'd like to do in the next chapters. So this first chapter was there to help you unfold your entrepreneurial personality, to show you that everyone can be an entrepreneur, and this is something you can learn. And what you can learn, we have to do in the next chapters. And one important issue is how to create the business idea and evaluate its potential. This is what we don't know right now, and if you have that, then you can get yourself started, and this is the real entrepreneurial process then, based on that entrepreneurial mindset we showed you in this chapter.